Hello, Wine and Dine listeners. This month, we are going to be featuring a winery called Hansen Vineyards. This is a family-run winery. And the really cool thing that we found out when we were visiting this winery is that the winemaker originally went to college in Ithaca, is from Oregon, but went to college in Ithaca, spent some time in Washington, D.C. He was super cool to talk to because he was more in the lawmaking side. So we had a little conversation about that, and then moved back to Oregon and his family farm with very, very deep roots in the area to, which I loved because they actually have that family farm and very deep roots. Of course, I loved that it was deep roots with Rooted Planning Group, but we had a chance to actually talk with them, with the winemaker when we were there. So much fun. If you want to follow him on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, it's Hansen Vineyards. So you can follow them there. But one thing that I discovered when I was there was that his great-grandfather's winemaker's great-grandfather was originally from Norway and moved to Oregon in 1896, purchased the farm that was across the road from the winery. They then took the property into a winery in 1930. So that's when it says very deep roots. That's what they mean. Well, let me tell you, we love their wine. Of course, they had a good Pinot Noir. That's what Oregon is known for. But today, what I'm going to talk about is their Gamay. The Gamay Noir is one of the different grapes that exists, and we loved it. It was unique. It was dry. It was mouthful, flavorful, really savored the wine. So if you enjoy something different, go try the Gamay Red that they have. It's $26 per bottle. Good price point. Of course, if you're going to have it shipped, there's additional costs associated with it. But we really enjoyed their Gamay. They do have a club that you can join if you're interested. Not trying to sell this company, of course, but I do really think that if you're looking for something different, there's no cost to join, which I absolutely love. If you get out to Oregon, there's complimentary wine tasting for you and your guests. You get 15% off the first 12 bottles each year. And then if you go beyond that, you get 25% off. You also have access to new and limited wines. And they do have some invitations that you can get invited to. One is out in July. Maybe it changes different each year. And then they do invite you to vertical tastings. Now, of course, we won't be able to be there, but we did talk to Jason, the winemaker, and ask if there's any way we could virtually do that. So we're trying to figure out how to do that. If we learn more, we'll certainly let you all know. One thing that I loved that Jason said to us is whether you're a wine connoisseur or a novice, I should say, he's very open to questions. And he really, truly embodied that. So, he said no questions are a dumb question. And we can usually get pretty deep in the weeds if you want, which is what we loved about our conversation. So we'd love for you to hop out onto their website, explore them. We're going to post a link in the Facebook page. And if you do happen to buy anything from them and he wants to know how you found out about us, just drop our name, Amy and Brent Irvine, or Wine and Dime Podcast. Thanks, everyone. We hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
Every week, it's my goal to share financial information that helps you both in your life and financial vineyard. We hope it takes you from your roots to the journey of your vines and the influences in the air that helped craft your delicious life. Like wine, life and finances have different palates that should be celebrated and not judged. Welcome to this edition of Wine and Dime with Amy Irvine. We have a very special guest today that I'm thrilled to get the chance to have this podcast recording with, because it is very similar to the way that we work with, I would say, female professionals. Today's guest actually does the same thing, but from a male lens. So I am very excited to have Jeff on the show today. And Jeff, just to make sure that I'm pronouncing your name correctly, to show that I'm not perfect, is the D silent?
It's Dvorak, so it almost sounds as if there's an E between those two first consonants, but Dvorak is how we've always... Okay,
because sometimes I'll see a name that the D, like the same way, and the D will actually be silent. So I guess it's just the way that the region, I guess you want to say. Just like wine, right?
The further
Like
you are removed from immigration, the more Americanized the sounding and phonetics get.
Well, it's kind of like Pinot, right?
Yeah.
A Pinot Noir. When somebody look at it, they'll say Pinot, and I'll say, well, it's actually pronounced Pinot. The T is silent. Well, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us. And as the listeners know, one of the very first things that I like to do when I have somebody on the show is to ask them if they have a particular beverage, wine, maybe bourbon, as I heard, beer that they like to just share as a favorite, just to talk about their journey a little bit and some of the things that they enjoy in life.
Absolutely. And that's a great kickoff question, Amy. I have a little bit of a unique story. So actually, a month ago, my 10-year younger brother, who lives and works in San Francisco, just got married. So we had the opportunity to go out, and he got married in the Sonoma area. And, if you're traveling from Chicago, where I'm located, to, the West Coast, you don't really go for a day trip or 2 days. You kind of try to make at least a long weekend out of it and see some of the beautiful scenery. So we had the opportunity to try some of the different wineries that they had proposed. And there was one that really stood out. And I've seen some of the bottles, at local liquor stores, but Kundi, Kundi, was one that really, from a holistic standpoint, the entire lineup from, Pinots to some of the sweeter dessert wines, which personally are not my thing. In the beautiful white Chardonnays, it was very robust. Everyone had a very flavorful taste that it really was memorable. Maybe that's because it was like 80 degrees and a beautiful mountainside view that I just felt like I was in paradise. But that was one of the wineries that, I had never heard of prior to being on site. And now it's certainly got me seeking, where can I get bottles that, you don't want to pay for shipping of cases across the country, as I'm sure that's quite expensive sometimes. Yeah. There was another one that we had, and you might appreciate this. So as you know, most red wines are not chilled, at least to the point that whites are. There's a winery called Jacuzzi, and we were brought a sample of a Dolcetto, it was called, Dolcetto, in the winery Jacuzzi, just like you would normally expect. But they served it much colder than a traditional red wine was. And to me, it was once again a very unique, very memorable, very enjoyable experience where I would certainly highly recommend, if you're out in the West Coast and you have access to that. I don't know the distribution and how readily available these are in different parts of the world, but
was it a sparkling
really caught
red?
My eyes.
Was that a sparkling red, or was it?
They just called it red. I think it was more of a blend, to be honest. But some of the science behind it, they said it was a very early harvest compared to any of the other reds. I'm trying to recall some of the statistics, but the flavor and just, I guess, being in Chicago, normally my wine preference has always been red because it's normally colder or more fall and, kind of cooler springs where you don't really need the chilly Pinot Gris or something, kind of easy to drink. And this one really just kind of took me by surprise. So I certainly would recommend that for any of the white wine drinkers that maybe want to convert to the red side.
You also said in the pre-conversation that you're a bourbon fan.
Yeah. So another really kind of strange story. When I was in college many, many years ago, I'm not going to reveal a date, but they used to have on Thursday nights for $10, you could go to a local, it wasn't a bar, but like a more of a restaurant, higher end restaurant, which no college kid should be able to afford. $10, 10 o'clock on Thursday nights, and they would have different families of alcohol with a, prior to the whole mixologist being an actual thing, they would have an expert in each, this could be anything from wines and beers to whiskeys and bourbons and scotches. So really to get, once again, like wine tasting, the sample, but the history and how to drink and how to approach the glass and use all of your senses to really embrace the profile, it got me into being kind of a bourbon snob prior to even being able to afford a bottle of my own. But it was one of those things that I guess the shelves are vast where, just like wine, there's so many different kinds and flavors that it's really exciting to try to find a new bottle.
I have never been a big bourbon person, but I'm learning. Well, so that's talking about all of this really does share the journey that you've been on. And I'd love to dig into kind of the finance side of this podcast a little bit. I mentioned in the intro that you also specialize in working with female professionals, that's something that when you started your company right out of the gate, you were looking to do. Tell me a little bit about, first of all, how did you become a financial planner, and what led you to that? What were some of the influences in your quote unquote vines, as we talk about that have led you down this path?
Yeah, another just fantastic question, because sometimes we lose track of our roots and where we came from, and we're so focused on the here and now. But I remember at a young age, I kind of already alluded, I have a 10-year younger brother. So technically we were kind of raised almost as only children. And at the time, both of my parents had worked. And, we'd sit around the dinner table as a family and all share a little tidbit about how our day was. Mom would vent about her work day. Dad would vent about his work day. And I would get to share how I got a, good score on my math and spelling test. But every time, both of my parents were in business, and my mom actually worked in investor relations for a public company. So she would be talking about the stock market and, all sorts of things that were just foreign to me. And I certainly don't expect many second or third graders to be exposed to those types. But it really, the more she spoke and kind of informed me of the challenges, and apparently I was told in hindsight that when I was even a younger child, she used to read annual reports and press releases and things as a trial run, because she would have to do this on conference calls to investors. That was my my lullaby. So I might have been pushed in this direction incidentally, but I've really created and grown a passion for it just from, it was something different. And we've all gone through reading and writing and science and social science, and the whole element of finance and economics, just, it wasn't presented at that young age. And it intrigued me because it was, I don't want to say taboo, but it was certainly brought out, much later in the course of the education curriculum. Mm-hmm. So I had attended the University of Illinois in Champaign as a finance major. The interesting part that, I kind of struggled with or gone back and forth with is, at the time, there were not many, if any, personal financial classes. Everything was really tailored toward the corporate employee and all the corporate finance facets. A lot on accounting, once again, more on the public corporate side of accounting rather than how to do your own tax return. So I guess even as a sophomore and junior, when you were getting into the meat and potatoes of what your major really was, you still weren't exposed to what financial planning at its roots truly are. And it wasn't until, after I graduated and accepted my first job at an independent RIA that I really got to see and experience, even wealthy people that I had visioned, my own parents, that we just talked about, that I had, put on a pedestal as these people are so intelligent and so, well-rounded that there's no way they don't know how to do their taxes or their own investing or, have a basic strategy for budgeting. And to see that this is something that applies to everybody really kind of roped me into, kind of demonstrate that there's power in this. And either I can end up paying somebody at some point in my life to assist me with this, or I can try to, face this head on and develop an understanding and expertise to not only protect and set up my own family for financial success, but share that with others in a non-sales, non-pressure environment, but really, embracing what fee only and, holistic, comprehensive financial planning are today.
So you came at this pretty early on in life then, really. I mean, this is something that obviously you had that, and what you were saying, your mom read you your lullabies were annual reports or press releases, right? So just like thinking about it coming out of college and saying, I want to make sure that I do something, like you said, there weren't really personal finance classes at the time, or there are very few programs. There's a lot more now.
Correct.
What made you want to then start your own firm?
When I first joined the RIA that I spoke of right out of school, I was, I think, the fifth or sixth employee at the time. So we were a very small shop, but had very, deep ties to some of the corporations headquartered in the Chicagoland area. Oak Brook specifically had quite a few, big companies that you're exposed to, not only the basic elements of budgeting and insurance and investments, but really wealthy people that you're doing very complicated tax returns, tax planning. You're involved in really deep and chaotic, for lack of a better term, estate plans, where there's maybe multiple marriages, multiple children, separate businesses. And just the challenge of chaos, I guess. I like to try, I guess I'm a puzzle solver by nature. It's always been a passion and a hobby, but seeing this wide array of information and trying to understand and identify the best way to structure it so that everybody came out ahead was something that really, kind of caught me by surprise that I didn't anticipate. And that love and passion for puzzling and creating and finding solutions had brought it to the next level. My firm, I had to create, at the time, technology was really taking off in kind of the early 2000s. There's been a lot of development from, Excel-based financial plans that used to be kind of the norm to now there's so many specialty softwares that we can use to both keep our clients engaged, informed, share some of the ideas that we understand, but in a pictorial, infographic type way where they can comprehend that data. And at the time, one of the owners of the firm was much later in his career, and technology really wasn't a focus. And, I felt like we were wasting a lot of time doing some of the manual labor of looking up statements, hard coding balances into an Excel sheet. And you really don't have as much time a day to share conversations with the families you're assisting. And that's where, my wife actually had the audacity to pull me aside and said, Jeff, you seem to be really busting your hump here. You're putting in way too many hours, and I don't think anybody knows it or appreciates it. So this is your chance. You've already completed the CFP certification. What have you got to lose at this point? And unfortunately, there were non-competes in place. So I did truly have to start off at ground zero. But all of the mistakes that you make along the way, as you probably can relate to, Amy, the first time you hang out your shingle and you open your door, anybody that's willing to, pay you and or listen to you becomes a client. And you certainly develop over time a filter that there are some people that I just admittedly don't have the expertise to assist. And there are other people that don't really want to listen to the advice. They just want to say that they met with a planner and that's their feel good moment, but they were never really serious about implementation. So yeah, my firm wasn't always, I guess I didn't know I was going to be an entrepreneur. I didn't know I was going to start something, but it kind of fell into right place, right time. And, of course, a leap of faith and a backing and support of family and loved ones.
Well, I think that spouses have a way of doing that because, it was my spouse that was like, why are you doing this for yourself? So I think they have a way of prompting us or prodding us, maybe that's a better word, of saying, maybe it's time, right? What kind of influences, when I think about, I mean, clearly you've said that, as a kid, you had some discussion around finance and certainly going into the first job that you had, going into the RIA space and then starting your own company. What made you want to like specialize in, I know you said when you first started, like it was sort of whoever would come work with you, but what made you want to specialize in working with female professionals?
And this is where I'm conflicted in my own answer, because I feel like it's two-pronged, but they both meet at the same point. And I'll expand upon that. But originally, a lot of the meetings that I had taken, it was very male dominant. I would ask questions to both the husband and the wife, and I'd be staring the wife directly in the eyes, asking a question that only she would have the answer to. And, the husband sitting also at the same table would immediately interject and start answering. So I don't want to stereotype by any means, but it seemed, at least in my sample set, that a lot of the females were being either neglected or not heard as much as I had tried. And at the same time, the male counterparts were also hesitant to accept the suggestions or recommendations. As you know, there's some times in financial planning where you have to say, I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to help you get to a better place. And that means that right now we have to make a sacrifice. And I know you're not going to want to hear it, but these are some of the things that we have to change in the short term. And a lot of times, that would warrant somebody going off to Google Academy and trying to self-educate and coming up with some article or opinion that, of course, was contradictory to the suggestion that I had given, even though, we'd have hours and hours of conversations and I've reviewed all of the data. Women, on the other hand, when I had a female-led household, it seemed appreciated, received, but it was genuine, where they knew they wanted help, they accepted the help, and they implemented the changes. Of course, I always tell people, if you have a thought, challenge me. I'm not perfect. I'd love to debate this so that when you second guess yourself, you can, internally debate the angel and devil on your shoulders and figure out why we did what we did. I don't want to have anybody, with a buyer's remorse or any sort of regret. Right. So naturally, it just seemed, maybe it's my personality, but women responded better. And, the other element of it was certain women, especially those that were successful in business, have a bit of a different personality. Let's be honest. We all kind of live in this male dominant corporate world where if you do want to succeed as a female, you've kind of got to, be a little stern. And, even I say this from a place of love. My wife always said, when I first met your mother, I thought she was going to put my head on a stick. And I said, no, she's a great person, but separating the work personality and persona of being, somebody that's in charge and has people working under you, it was, I guess, almost viewed as a sign of weakness. So I've had a couple clients that were, also very high up in their companies. And at first, you'd send an email and you'd get one-word responses, and you'd have a phone call, and I couldn't pry them to answer any question with more than, a six-word sentence. And, I know that they don't devalue or, have a problem with me or my service. It's really just, that's the personality, and getting to understand how to work with that personality has been something that I've tried to develop, a specialty around. I know time is important. Everybody's got to get home, put food on the table for the family. They don't want to hear about all of the little things. It's, what are the big ticket items and how can you help me? And if there is something that I have to do, Jeff, please just let me know. So yeah, it's a bit of a roundabout, but it seemed that those 2 points kind of just collided in the middle, where I wasn't getting very far with, the male dominant households, and I certainly enjoyed working with the female-led ones, but at the same time, I kind of had this innate ability to peel back some of the layers of those otherwise more, walled off personalities.
Well, I'll say, again, we both have always said we don't like to stereotype in any way, shape, or form. But I will say that one of the things that I love about working with other professional women is the education piece. It's not just about do this, do that. It's here's the reason why I would recommend this, or here's the reason why I would recommend that. Because ultimately it is their money and it's their decision. And our responsibility as financial planners is to tell them about the different options and make sure that they match up with their values, right? So if they understand why they're doing something, then there's buy-in very easily, right? So but they want the education. They actually want to understand it, and they want to take the time to get to know it better, even though the relationship is very long-term. And by the time we've worked with them for a couple of years, I think both you and I have talked about this in the past offline, is that they could probably do it on their own. They've gotten enough education, but it's about time and at that stage. So they're knowledgeable enough to be able to do it on their own at that stage, but they really are committing resources. I mean, by resources, I mean time and other areas. So they choose to continue working with us for that particular reason. That's what I love about working with, like you said, female-led homes, because they just priority-wise, they're usually pretty clear about where their priorities need to be. And I always enjoy that.
Absolutely. And financial planning is one of those disciplines that you could absolutely self-educate, but is that something that would take away from the other hobbies and leisure activities, or your professional, curriculum and other progression that you need in your own 9-to-5 life? And
there's only so many hours in a given day. What do we do with that?
Exactly. And sometimes just finding the first available, hit on the internet from a search about how does an IRA RMD work, and you just run with it, and people end up getting themselves into very big, very costly trouble because there's always fine print.
Yeah. The big one that I hear, it's funny that you bring up RMDs, because anymore I hear people say 72 and a half, right? I'm like, well, no, you're actually combining two laws. You're combining the old one of 70 and a half with the new one of 72, and hold on to your seat, because we never know if that might change to a different age. So,
right.
Yeah,
a
that's
lot
where
of people are still stuck in the mindset where maybe they had an awareness when they had lost a loved one years ago prior to 2019. And, they said, hey, I've got to take a little bit every year. And they're not necessarily aware of some of the changes in the legislature where you've kind of got 10 years now.
Right.
And once again, it's not that they were illiterate or incompetent, but things change. And unless you come back and make sure you're in line with the newest.
Yeah, you're keeping up with it. Yeah, this is our area where we're getting continuing education and attending conferences, and we're constantly reading, learning. Where if you're a CEO of a company, as an example, you're focused on your business. You're focusing on what's going on in your own little, corner of the planet. It's keeping up on the rules and regulations as they change. It's not as it's a very as slow as it changes, it also changes rapidly. If that sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my cheek, it's true. I mean, things just randomly sort of change or revert back, because laws are sometimes temporary in nature and they revert back. So keeping on top of those is really important too.
Absolutely.
Would you say that, I'm just curious, what has kept you? So, I kind of heard your story about what got you into this, but what has kept you in this profession? Because there is quite a bit of turnover in our profession. What has kept you going?
I would say the biggest thing that I still enjoy waking up to is knowing that every day is going to be different, and you don't fall into a rut where you're just grinding through the same old, whether it's task or project just for a different family. You could have 3 families that on paper look like they are all doppelgangers, mirror images, clones of each other. and the way that they need to be spoken to behaviorally and psychologically could differ. Their own intrinsic values and morals could differ. Their tangible goals and objectives could differ. And there's so many differences in, every family that I've worked with and have even heard stories and case studies about. And that's something that, just when you think you kind of understand, well, this worked last time, or this was the solution I used in a prior similar case, you can never just jump to that conclusion without doing the legwork and really understanding all of the other elements and what this specific individual or family is dealing with. So in short, I love just the diversity of challenges and issues that keep me on my toes, because I feel like once we get complacent in life, you really lose the drive, the passion, and, you start to kind of fall off in more ways than one. So
yeah, keeping that eye open for opportunities, I think, is always intriguing. One of the things that I've always loved about since I started my own firm is that most of the people that we work with don't have unlimited resources. They've got competing goals that they're dealing with, and it's finding the solution to those competing goals, and it's putting the pieces of that puzzle together to actually figure out, how does it work to help you achieve the goals that you have? Like, how do we move the parts and pieces around on the board to make it come together in the way that, is going to stand for you and be true to your values. And for people that don't, I won't say that you were talking about the complications of more of a uber wealthy type person. I'm not saying they don't have complications and they don't have competing goals, but generally speaking, they're not things like, do I save more for retirement or put my kids through college? They're not those kinds of competing goals. And I always think that that's where our value is. And that's sort of the uniqueness of what we get to do on a daily basis too, is solve the puzzle.
Yep.
Or for people that it's really quite important that they don't have those unlimited resources, and every dollar that we shift one way or the other really is very impactful to them. So now you fast forward. Oh, by the way, I was going to ask you the question because I loved your company name. So 4D Financial Advisors is the name of your company. How did you come up with that name?
So this is another, you might appreciate it from a business sense, but once you know the story and we become good friends, everybody kind of jabs an elbow into my ribs. But when I was first thinking about the name, I have younger kids, and you had gone to one of those movies where they give you the 3D glasses. So I had gone, and I want to say it was like Finding Nemo, traditional story, little fish swimming around. But when you put on the 3D glasses, you start to see things that you didn't previously pick up on. And forget the plot development, but little hidden gems or Easter eggs, as we've known to call them. So when I was thinking about a name, I said, we live in this 3D world. I want to be, the glasses. I want to help people see, the next dimension, to understand, what's going on in a perspective that they aren't looking at or aren't able to look for at this point. So 4D was, to me, it was short, it was simple. The tagline was an added dimension to your financial future. But in the, a lot of the databases, the other benefit is it's alphanumeric. So starting with the number beats some of the rankings, which is always, a nice little cherry on top. But if there's anything that I can, advocate about the way that I work, is bringing a different perspective and helping people see things through a lens that they had not otherwise been exposed to or had been able to see.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I mean, that's kind of cool. The bringing in, another lens to the table. I think that's pretty creative. I struggled so much when I was naming the company, and the actual parent company, the LLC itself, actually is Irvine Wealth Planning Strategies. But we do business as Rooted Planning Group. And the reason for that was because when I first formed the company, I also had a non-compete, and I wanted people to know that, hey, I am, doing financial planning. So here, let me do some advertising, and I knew people in the community would recognize it. Fast forward to when I started adding team members, that became a bit of a challenge, because now, it's like, well, who's Irvine? Like, what's Irvine? What does that have to do with anything? And so we ended up changing, creating the DBA of Rooted Planning Group, so that it was more of a team, kind of view than just a name like Irvine, just having my name in it. So I always find it interesting when I see unique names of financial planning firms, because, the thought of like what this is going to be in the future, I think for a lot of people doesn't necessarily, it's like, if I can just get this thing to work, I'll be happy. They don't necessarily think about the legacy of the name either, or how the taglines or marketing can go along with it either. I mean, so kudos to you for coming up with that. And you offer both ongoing financial planning services as well as like a one-time financial plan, or even like projects and stuff like that as well, correct?
Correct. I mean, the bulk of it is certainly ongoing. All of my relationships, I'm sure you're probably similar, but all of my relationships start with the creation of the plan, whether it's a one-time only, which is really tailored more to the DIY crowd, that maybe they're not at a point in time that there is too much complication or sophistication, but they just want that doctor's physical to say, hey, these are the kind of red flag areas that I need to pay attention to, and here's some suggestions on how I can alleviate those potential pain points. But most of the business that I do is ongoing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what would you say, when you think about your own journey too, combined with like as a business owner, what are some of the things that you would say have been challenges? I would say like many vineyards have challenges, just like lives have challenges, right? What obstacles would you say that you've experienced as a business owner, and what obstacles are you seeing a lot of your clients experience, especially in today's world?
That's another fantastic question. I think the answer to the first part of it is, once again, multifaceted, because as a business owner, you have to learn and grow as an individual simultaneously to growing your business. And in my opinion, there's nothing more humbling than an early, somewhat consistent failure of, hey, I talked to this individual and, they ended up not choosing me over my competition. And why is that? What am I doing wrong? Did I say something? Am I not smart enough? Am I not, do I not have an ensemble team where I'm just one person? And you start to try to identify all of these things that maybe you're doing inefficiently, or that are perceived to be inferior to what a different firm or competitor might offer. So on top of trying to grow my business, I think I opened my doors when I was 27 years old. So I was,
pretty young,
much younger, and certainly going through the maturation process in the same time, where I had to understand, how do I convince people that I am just as capable as the guy with gray hair that's been doing this for 35 years. And actually, I'm probably more hungry to learn and prove myself and demonstrate the expertise and value that I can bring to you. But over a course of another 40 years, where that individual has certainly probably had a wonderful career, impacted many lives, but I don't know how much longer that type of person is going to be around.
Mm-hmm.
And if and when you do need help, are you just going to be shuffled to the next advisor on that team? Or do you really want to build an intimate relationship with somebody that's, in my case, a solo practitioner? So for me, the biggest challenges were, certainly probably more personal in nature, and understanding how to communicate with certain types of individuals. And there's so many different behavioral and psychological classifications that, you can identify this behavior group and how to communicate with them. And some of that stuff is relevant, but ultimately, you also have to have a confidence level. And when you have a very limited number of clients, you've only been doing this for a handful of months independently, the confidence, relatively speaking, is at an all-time low. And building upon that and being able to shake the hand of Mr. CEO and, Mrs. CEO and really demonstrate that, you're in good hands and here's all the things that we can do to improve the problems that you've just come to me with. That's something that I didn't have at that younger age. And I think kind of throwing myself to the wolves is something that you can't quantify, you can't prepare for. It's almost just like having your first child. You can read a book or watch a class, or you'll never understand what it feels like to, hear the cry in the middle of the night and have to go change a diaper and get spit up on. You're just drowning from every angle possible. And that to me is very synonymous with my creation of 4D. It was a learning experience more on the personal side. I've always felt very comfortable from the knowledge and academia standpoint, but sometimes the thoughts and concepts in my head, I couldn't articulate or demonstrate to the clientele as effectively as I wanted to. But over time, after several failures, you start to identify what's not working and, trust your colleagues and clients for feedback and say, those of you that are satisfied, what are the things you value the most?
Yeah.
And what can I be doing better? There's been a lot of talk about advisory boards. And I think that feedback is so important that we may not want to hear it or may be ashamed to ask for it, but those are the types of things that really improve the trajectory of growth.
Yeah. Good point. And as far as like the things that your clients are seeing for obstacles, are you seeing anything? Does anything stand out in particular?
I think right now we're at a unique period because, of course, there's a lot of headlines on the investment side with the markets and the economy. That, to me, will always be there in one way, shape, or form. I think the biggest challenge right now that I'm seeing is there's kind of another big wave of at least my clients that are having students finishing up high school, getting ready to go to college. And what that process looked like 20 years ago is very different than, first of all, the competitive level of getting scholarships and grants and all sorts of, the admissions and acceptance rates are just, everything is so cutthroat these days. And tuition costs have certainly increased to points that are not comfortable. So a lot of those, conversations are, how much, if at all, do we want to help, our 3 or 4 children pay for college? And if we do want to help, how do we navigate somebody that wants to go to, Princeton versus somebody that wants to go to a local community college, paying for everybody to go to school if they're very different costs? It was more just the internal family dynamic of, I don't want my one child to feel like they didn't get as much, or that one was, chosen as a favorite. But to me right now, that seems to be a theme with more families than I would have expected.
Interesting.
Have you noticed anything along those lines?
I would say that, we're certainly a lot of our clients are in the X-Gen, age group. So, the average age of our clients are, it's just about my age, 49 to 50 years old. Although we have a fair number of clients that are younger and a fair number that are older. The bell curve definitely is, closer that along with the average. And they are in that competing goal of, retirement is probably 15 years, maybe a little less in some cases down the road. Maybe we do have a couple of clients that work for companies that you can retire at 55, and many do retire from that company and then, take a second ensemble career or something. And it is a challenge when it comes to, some of those people are just finishing or have just finished paying off their own student loans, and they don't want their kids to be burdened with that same level. And so they're really struggling to try to figure out, not only how do they pay for their kids' education or co-pay for their kids' education, but how do they do it if they have multiple children, as you were saying? Like, how do you make sure? In fact, there's several clients that are, trying to figure out what is the exact dollar amount, bringing education into the family to say, okay, kids, we're going to consistently give this much money to each of you. You can pick a college that you, know that you're going to get a fair amount covered, or you can pick a college that that you're going to have to end up paying more out of pocket. But here's what we can afford to give you, and still be able to retire at a reasonable age. So I do think that that is a big challenge. And I think it's a big challenge for a lot of people, again, just because one of the big issues is they don't want their children to walk out of college feeling like they've been overcome with debt. And yet college is so expensive that how do you do it? How do you make it work?
Absolutely. And navigating that, and in my perspective, adding any peace of mind and saying, we will discover a plan. We will, walk through simulations with as accurate assumptions as we can, but you need to just live in the here and now. And I always tell my clients, I said, don't try to win from where you are. Try to get into such a good position that a successful outcome is just inevitable. So don't think about 7 years from now when you're going to have 3 kids in college at the same time.
Right.
Start the building blocks today so that by the time we get there, it's a non-factor, because you'll lose your mind trying to take into account all of the possible changes and pathways that life can evolve over those 7 years.
That is true. Is there anything I'm thinking about just again, like informing your vineyard? Was there any specific nutrient or anything that really stood out to you that somebody can go get or seek that ultimately help you get to where you are today, and continue to have that growth that you were looking for?
So on the financial planning side, the one, I guess, piece of advice, for lack of a better term, would be talking about money is not a sinful act. And so many families, from my own clients to even, some of the families we've grown up in, don't talk about anything financial related at all. And I'm not just saying how much you make and, how much your property taxes are, but if there was, a lost loved one, understanding, hey, this is something that I just had to go through. There's this probate process and I didn't know anything about it, but you guys might want to look into this with your, generation above you. And I feel like some of these things that I'm seeing that I'm dealing with, after the fact, I wish I could have inserted myself into their lives and, established this conversation a year or two ago, because so many of these hurdles that they're facing, they could have taken a detour and eliminated entirely. So even in your example, Amy, talking with the family and just, call it a campfire and gather everybody around.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, this is what we have to offer. Each of you are getting X number of dollars, and I certainly want you to go chase your dreams and whatever university or college you feel is most appropriate for your major. By all means, I wish you the best, but financially speaking, we cannot afford to give you any more. So just having those little tidbits at a young age, I think also give the children or young adults confidence
and expectations
to bring up questions to whether it's mom and dad or, as a parting gift for all of my clients that have high school graduates, I always offer, 1 or 2 different complimentary hour sessions before they send their kids off to college, not with mom and dad on the line, but just so that they could ask somebody that's a trusted, knowledgeable source some of the questions that maybe they're embarrassed about or maybe they're unsure of, but going to the internet and finding, once again, more of an opinion is, detrimental. So being
Mm-hmm.
able to just have a
It's
resource.
dangerous to live among the laws of numbers, isn't it? I mean, when we say generally speaking or basic guidelines, it's very dangerous to live among those averages.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But so many people that information costs $0 to go seek out.
Right.
And especially when you're younger in your career or possibly even a student, you're most likely not interested in paying anybody for a service that you can find a somewhat reasonable answer to online. So
Well,
I always include that.
I encourage people not to do that. What would you say your definition of success is?
I have always felt, personally that the greatest joys in my life have always come from helping other people achieve their goals. And that kind of, I guess, rings true on a parallel path with being a financial planner. But even if it's a hobby or, a sport or activity that I'm involved in, I've gotten more satisfaction out of seeing a new person come into it and grow and fall in love with something that changed their life. Just as you speak so passionately about wine, you could take running or cycling or boxing, whatever it may be that gets you, amped up in the morning. I just enjoy helping others find their true passion. And, when I was trying to think, I think I was 16 years old, but I was a long distance runner and it was pretty good, nothing terribly special, but I had a life altering knee injury. And after several surgeries, I'm still not supposed to run anymore. So I was kind of deprived of I'll use the term love. I really just loved waking up, running in the morning while the sun rose and the birds chirped, and going to races. But when that was taken from me, I morphed into a cyclist and I found a low impact sport that I could kind of share with others. And, ever since I've kind of been just jumping around. I want to really enjoy and experience all that life has to offer. So I've dabbled in just about every personal activity, but along the way, it's not my own success that I'm trying to achieve. Of course, that's always the main objective, but bringing and sharing the joy with others is something that I'm very passionate about.
Such a lovely definition. I think when we share our successes with others and our failures, to be honest, too, it's amazing. What can come out of that sometimes. Some of my it's so wonderful when you can see other people succeed, even if it succeed better than you, and that you were part of it, right? It's just such a joy. And it's especially like that with clients. I think, we're always striving to see their success be even greater than our success. So, well, Jeff, in closing, thank you for spending so much time with us today. But in closing, I always like to switch over to a section of the podcast called Nourish Your Vines. And this is where we take just a minute or two for our guests to provide maybe one financial lesson that they've learned in their lives, especially when we're interviewing financial planners, because everybody thinks we're perfect because we're in finance. We must not make any mistakes. The real idea is, folks, just so you know, we also do. So I always like to share, if you have one tip that you could give to folks or one lesson that you've learned, what would that be?
The one thing that really changed my mind, and this kind of came through from reading some more fictional novels, but try to see challenges, see problems, see life from an outside perspective. We, of course, approach everything with the information and the emotions that impacted us directly, but especially as I've gotten older and tried to mature more, it was more valuable to put myself in that person's shoes and say, if I was them and this had happened to me, what might I expect to do? What might I be feeling if I just got, laid off after moving halfway across the country to take a job? what would I be going through? The financial planner in me would be hitting the panic button saying, oh my gosh, we've got to, do all of these things. But is that the type of response that the client will need right now? Or is there a different period that, we have to just kind of let their emotions die out? They're dealing with, a very severe thing. Of course, I want to be there for guidance, but there's a time and a place when they're going to be ready to hear it and listen to it. So for all things in life, whether it's political affiliation or, whatever your feelings on all of the horrible acts that we've, recently heard about in the news, put yourself in some of the other people's shoes and at least just try to understand where others are coming from. And if you still feel the same way you do, then kudos. But for me personally, I think I've changed my stance and position on a lot of things just from trying to not be so tunnel vision and focused.
I love that. I love that. One of the things that I've said over the last couple of years, especially, or not, this is conversations between my husband and I, is that it's okay if, especially on the political front, if we disagree. I would love for people to feel like we can still talk to each other about why we feel the way we do and maybe learn from something instead of you're right, I'm wrong, kind of an environment that we sort of got into for a little while. And I love that from a financial planning perspective, even, and from a business owner, from a person, you're trying to listen and explore and be curious about why somebody feels differently. Even if it ultimately doesn't change your mind, it might give you new perspective. So, I love that. That's the one lesson that we're walking away from you today, Jeff. And I so appreciate your time. And how can people reach you? I know your website we'll put in the show notes, but how can people follow you or reach you or get more information about you?
The website is probably going to be the best place for now. Admittedly, one of my big, I don't want to say regrets, but I am not a social media person.
Don't regret
it. On the personal side, it always seems that the people that are contacting me it's artificial. It's not a genuine relationship. So I said, you know what? I'd rather have a more real, engaging process. So I'm not terribly big on, the automated posts on social media. Mm-hmm. If you want to connect, I'm happy to, email or call directly. But at this point, I guess I've kind of removed myself from being a content creator. So I greatly appreciate all the work that you and your team have done to launch a successful podcast and have people like me as a part of it. But at this point,
it has its pros and cons. I mean, there's days I love it and other days that I'm like, I'm doing this what? So it's getting, honestly, one of my favorite things about having the podcast is getting to meet new people like you. And not that we met through the podcast, but getting to meet people more. So, just to explore. Sometimes it's, exploring other people's journey, like you, like a financial planner, or other times it's something completely different that we talk about, like, burnout or, just general kinds of conversations. And that's one of the reasons that I do the podcast, in addition to the sort of another outlet for me. But yeah, I can appreciate the fact that you've elected not to do that. And it is work. And I'm thankful that I have a great editor and a wonderful editor behind me, because thank goodness I don't have to do any of that. I just get to have the fun conversations and turn it over. But we are so thankful for you taking time, like I said, out of your schedule to be on the show. We will put your contact information, website in the show notes. And if anybody has any questions, we always love to hear your questions. Feel free to share this podcast if you heard something on it that you find to be very helpful to you. Both Jeff and I would love to hear anything that you want answered, because we can always come back through and put questions in the show notes or follow up. And we hope that you enjoyed the time that you spent with us today. Thanks everyone for listening. And again, we hope you have a great afternoon or evening or morning after listening. Thanks so much.
And that will about do it for today's episode of Wine and Dime. You can contact Amy through the website, www.rootedpg.com, or amy@rootedpg.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at rootedpg for the latest news. And if you have any questions, comments, or topics you would like to hear about, feel free to let us know. And don't forget to rate and subscribe the show wherever you get your podcasts. And again, thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in next time.